On the eastern shores of the Hudson, in the great state of New York, there's a little valley which is the quietest place in the entire world. In this secluded glen, the residents there believe that the place is bewitched. For years and years, the town has been known as Sleepy Hollow, and the whole neighborhood abounds with local tales, haunted spots, and twilight superstitions. And the premier specter of them all is a figure on horseback. It is said to be the ghost of a Hessian trooper whose head was carried away by a cannonball during one of the nameless battles of the American Revolution. They say that the Hessian's body, which was buried in the churchyard, still rides to the scene of the battle on a nightly quest to find his head. He is known by all the country firesides as the Headless Horseman. It is to this place that Ichabod Crane, a school teacher, came to stay. A native of Connecticut, he was tall and lanky, with a tiny head, huge ears, and a long nose. If you were to see him walking along a hillside on a windy day with his clothes billowing about him, you could easily mistake him for a scarecrow from the cornfields. He was friendly with his students, especially those who had pretty sisters, or mothers who were known for their excellent cooking. In tradition with the country customs of the area, he would stay at the houses of the children that he taught. He would carry with him the local gossip, so that his arrival was always anticipated. Moreover, the women of the town thought him a man of great intellect because he had read many books, including being an expert at Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft, in which he firmly and potently believed. And living in this spellbound region, his appetite for these stories only grew. There was no story too monstrous or gross for him. In fact, he loved sitting outside of school after the school day and flipping through Mather's old direful tales until the dusk came and obscured the print from the page. And then, on his ride home to whichever farmhouse he was staying at the time, the sounds of nature would play tricks on his overactive imagination. Whether it was the call of the whippoorwill, the cry of the tree toad, the hooting of the screech owl, or the sudden rustling in the thicket of frightened birds. Even the fireflies startled him from time to time. Ichabod was also the music teacher of the town. He would give lessons on the side to earn a little extra money, and one of his students was Katrina Van Tassel, the daughter and only child of a substantial Dutch farmer. Katrina was renowned not only for her beauty, but also for her family's vast wealth. The Van Tassels owned a tremendous estate, and Ichabod's heart yearned after the damsel who was set to inherit it all. His mind ran wild with what that sort of wealth could afford him. But Ichabod had competition for Katrina's affections in the form of a burly Dutchman named Brom Bones. Bones made it his lot in life to embarrass Ichabod whenever he could, including breaking into the schoolhouse at night and turning everything over so that Ichabod thought it was the result of witchcraft. One day, Ichabod got an invitation to a community gathering at the Van Tassel estate. Sensing an opportunity to impress, he cleaned himself up and rented the only steed he could in order to ride to the party. A broken down old plow horse, ironically named Gunpowder. Now, to see Ichabod on this beast was quite the sight. The stirrups were short so that his knees came up to almost the pommel of the saddle, and his sharp elbows stuck out like those of a grasshopper's. And so as the horse was trotting along, his arms looked not unlike those of a pair of flapping wings. In contrast, Brom Bones came on his dazzling black stallion, Daredevil. Now, there was much feasting and dancing and singing at the festivities, and then things turned to storytelling. And they focused on Sleepy Hollow's favorite subject, the Headless Horseman. He had been heard patrolling the country as of late, and Brom Bones dazzled the crowd with the daring tale of how he raced the horseman, and he almost beat him too. But the horseman disappeared by the churchyard bridge at the last second in a column of fire. Ichabod took all these stories in, and they sunk deep into his mind. Now, no one knows for sure what was said, but Ichabod was seen leaving the party dejected. Some say he was talking to Katrina beforehand, and so one could infer that his advances were rejected. and that his dreams of great wealth were crushed. As he left the party, all the night stories of ghosts and goblins came rushing to his mind, and the night seemed to get darker and darker, and the stars seemed to shrink further into the sky. Ichabod had never felt so alone and dejected. And then suddenly he heard something from behind him, and another rider was approaching, and he immediately thought of the stories of the galloping Hessian from the evening. And so he put on a little speed to try to distance himself from this mysterious stranger, but the other rider matched his pace. So he tried to pull up and lag behind, but again, the rider matched him. Ichabod's heart began to sink within him. He feared his reckoning was upon him. The rider approached a high ridge and was illuminated against the night sky. A gigantic figure cloaked in a black cloak, and Ichabod was horrified to notice he was headless. And that horror only intensified when Ichabod noticed that that head that was supposed to be on the rider's shoulders was actually situated in the saddle right before him. And that horror then turned to desperation, and he rained down a series of kicks and blows on the gunpowder to try to get him to race away from the mysterious stranger. And all he managed to do was loosen the saddle, so that when gunpowder did take off, he watched helplessly as the saddle fell to the ground below. And the horseman took off after them, full speed, in pursuit, and away they went. Now, Ichabod remembered the story from that night, and that if he could just reach that bridge, the horseman should disappear. "If I can reach that bridge," he said, "I'll be safe." He could feel the huffing and blowing of the black horse directly behind him, and he gave Gunpowder another swift kick in the ribs, and the horse sprang upon the churchyard bridge and thundered along the planks to the other side. Ichabod chanced to look back to see if the rider would actually disappear in a cloud of fire and brimstone, as the stories had foretold. Instead, he saw something far worse. The goblin was rising on his saddle, and he threw his head at him! And now Ichabod tried to dodge that terrible missile, but too late. It struck him in the head with a mighty crash, and Ichabod fell to the ground as the horseman and Gunpowder whizzed past him. The next morning, the old horse was found without his saddle. Ichabod didn't show up to breakfast, nor dinner. He didn't show up to school that day either, so an investigation was launched. They found the saddle trampled in the dirt, and just past the churchyard bridge, on the banks of the brook where the water runs dark and deep, they found poor Ichabod's hat, and next to it, a shattered pumpkin. This created quite the stir at church the following Sunday, but the people remembered the stories from that night and came to the conclusion that Ichabod had been carried away by the headless horseman. Since he was a bachelor and in nobody's debt, nobody gave much more thought to poor Ichabod Crane. The school was moved to another part of town, and another teacher brought in to replace him. But the old country wives, the keepers of the tales, insist that Ichabod Crane was spirited away by supernatural means, and that the old schoolhouse, which fell into disrepair after Ichabod disappeared, is still haunted to this day by his ghost. These and more make up the legends of Sleepy Hollow.